Hi guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we'll be talking about my top 10 Swiss culture shocks part 2. Basically, this is where I talk about my surprises or interesting observations when I first arrived in Switzerland. I love doing this sort of videos because I think it's a nice way for me to reminisce on how it was back then when I first arrived, but also it's also a way for me to share more with you about how it is really like living in Switzerland apart from my usual travel videos. And if you have not hit the subscribe button, now is the perfect time to do so. Without further ado, let's get going. My first culture shock is realizing that the Swiss people are actually super polite. And coming from a country like Singapore, where it's actually super weird if you go up and say hi to a person or you're smiling at a random stranger in the lift. We don't do that in Singapore, but here I was pleasantly surprised that, with my neighbors or with the cashiers at the supermarket, the first thing that you would do before any interaction is to say bonjour or bonsoir or grüezi if you're at the German-speaking part of Switzerland. And in fact, if you don't do that, it's kind of considered pretty rude to not say hi. So I found this very refreshing, and it's also a nice friendly way to just interact on like a superficial level, but still just a really friendly way to greet one another and to just add on to something nice that you do for the day. My next culture shock is related to the whole polite culture in Switzerland, and that is the Bise. Oh god, this is a big deal for me. So I think this is something that is quite prevalent in France and also the French speaking side of Switzerland. I'm not super sure if this is done at the German side, but basically when the Swiss meet one another, they won't say hi or they won't hug one another. Instead, what they do is to lean in and give 3 kisses on the cheeks. And to me, a Singaporean was not super comfortable with physical touches with strangers. This was like, oh my gosh, I have to kiss a stranger that I've just met. So this is done between women to women, men to women, whereas for between men to men, I don't think they do the bisu. They would just shake hands or maybe give like a man hug. But for me, I found this so awkward. Like, imagine, I think the first time I did this bisu thing was we were going for a dinner with a friend that I've never met before. It was Vincent's friend, and I remembered that before going to the person's house, I was so stressed out. Like, I was thinking like, oh gosh, like, oh no, where should I lean in, and do I smell bad, or do I really have to do this bisu with the children as well? It was just super uncomfortable for me, and I think that the best thing that happened in COVID was that there was no more bisu. I was like, oh, so relieved that I don't have to lean in and kiss people that I've never known. But unfortunately, because COVID is over, it's back. But yeah, up to this day, I'm still quite uncomfortable. I think it's okay if I do it with like friends I know quite comfortably, but with acquaintance and with colleagues, I'm like, oh, I still detest the thought of bisu. The third culture shock is related to toasting. So in Singapore, we have the whole yam sing thing, right? Like we just clink our glasses together. We don't look at one another. We just yam sing. That's how we do it at weddings, right? But here they have a different way of toasting. So instead of just clinking glasses together, there is a specific way. You have to look at the person in the eye and go like santé. And you have to do it with every single person in the room. You can't just do it together. So yeah, and the saying is that the saying goes that if you don't toast correctly, you're gonna have 7 years of bad sex. Okay, so do your toasting right if you don't want to suffer a bad time in the bedroom. The next culture shock came a bit of a surprise to me because I always had this initial impression that Switzerland is a very efficient country. I admit that when it comes to the trains, yes, they're super on time, super efficient. But when you're talking about like Swiss administration, I'm sorry, everything takes time here. So we're so used to the efficiency in Singapore, right? Like you're applying for passports, or if you want to get a debit card, you go to the bank, you just get it on the spot. You just do it online and things are processed like super quickly and easily. Here in Switzerland, they're still not that advanced when it comes to doing e-submission of stuff. You have to basically like get all your paperwork and then submit them, and it usually takes like 3 to 4 weeks, up to a month, just to get like simple things like renewing your residency card or applying for a loan or filing taxes. The taxes one is the worst. I'm not gonna go into detail about that, but that's a whole nightmare. But yeah, it's super stressful to be doing administration in Switzerland, and also I think for a foreigner as well, because the administrative letter comes entirely in French, and then you also have to understand what the hell that they're talking about. So that was a culture shock to me, realizing that it's not as efficient as I thought in Switzerland and that everything just takes so much time. Next culture shock is realizing how expensive childcare is in Switzerland. Well, I'm not a mother, I don't have any kids yet, but these are observations that I know of based on conversations with my colleagues or friends who have kids. But it's super expensive if you have 2 kids or just 1 kid and you have to send them in for daycare. In fact, Switzerland, the average Swiss family spends 41% of their net income on childcare, and this is 3 times higher than the OECD average. And the way that they compute how much you should be paying for childcare differs by family. It depends on your income, and it also depends on your level of wealth. So say for example, if you're a low-income family and maybe you only have 1 sole breadwinner in the family, you pay a lower amount, and then it gets more expensive if you're a dual-income family. So I was doing some research, and for public daycare, again, it really depends on the cantons that you stay. It is maybe lower in certain cantons where there are lesser people, but more expensive if you're living in like big cities. If you're a couple that has an annual 100,000 income, you can expect to pay about 1,005 of CHF per month, which is roughly about 2,000 Sing dollars per month on childcare. And if you're earning higher, like 150,000, you can expect to pay up to 1.8 Swiss francs per month. So that's really quite exorbitant amount to pay for childcare. And it gets even more expensive if you're opting for private daycare, because usually the public daycares are always full and you need to be on waiting list. So I found it super prohibitive to raise a family here because of all this cost. And it is also partly a reason why a lot of women in the Swiss workforce, they tend to drop out, because it adds up. The whole cost of sending your kids to childcare is probably like half of your salary is taken away just to put your kid in childcare. So a lot of women either work part-time or they quit the workforce entirely to stay home and take care of their children. And I found that a little bit unfavorable for working mothers. If you have reached this part of the video and you found information here helpful or interesting when it comes to planning or learning more about Switzerland, you can consider giving this video a thumbs up, and also to subscribe to the channel. That will help me out so much, because I realized that over 90% of you are still not subscribed to the channel even though you watch my videos, and I would really appreciate that from you. With that, let's get back into the video. The next culture shock is very interesting, and that is realizing that in Switzerland, the kids walk to school by themselves. Back in Singapore, I don't think you will ever find a 4-year-old walking on the streets to their own kindergarten or childcare. They will either be ferried by their parents to the childcare, or their maid will send them to school. But here it's very common to see kids all by themselves walking to school, and then they will wear like the orange and green, the safety vest. I think that this is more prevalent in the German-speaking side of Switzerland. You will find this practice more common, whereas in the Western-speaking side, in the French part, it's less common. Instead, what they have is this program called like the Pendy Bus. Essentially translates to a pedestrian walking school bus. So instead of the kids walking to school by themselves, they will be accompanied by 1 adult, which is a parent volunteer, and then groups of children from like 4 to 8 years old, they will walk to school accompanied by this adult. I just found this whole practice super interesting, because I know for sure that if this was implemented in Singapore, the parents would be like, oh my god, what if my kids are abducted? What if they get knocked out by a car? But it seems like the Swiss parents have a different approach to it. I think they find that this is a good way to cultivate independence in their children from young, and that's also partly the reason why I think that Swiss in general are very self-reliant and they're very independent. And you can see why, because they have been trained from the start, since as young as 4 years old, to be walking to school by themselves. Next culture shock is also related to schools, but this is something I realized, that in Switzerland there is no such thing as a school canteen, and the children come home for lunch every single day. So whether they are 4 years old or 14 years old, the schools break for lunch every day for 2 hours in the afternoon. And since they don't have a school canteen, that means that depending on the canton that you stay, the kids will return home between 11:45 and 12:15 for lunch, and then they go back to school again at between 1:15 to 1:30 p.m. Imagine if you're a parent and you don't work from home, or you're not at home during these days. How is your child going to get lunch? And also, since there are no canteens in school, which means to say either you have to prepare lunch for your kid every day, or you have to search for after school lunch at maybe some other parts of the city, it's not provided by the school, and it can be the case that it's at another side of town, so your child has to find a way to make it there to get his lunch and go back to school, which for me is like bizarre. Like, why can't the schools just install a school canteen in every school for the child to get their food? Isn't it more complicated to have all this like after school care arrangement? I really don't know why. It's just bizarre to me that, you know, kids come home for lunch every day. And again, that is partly the reason why a lot of women drop out of the workforce after having children, because as you can see, there's just so much cost and also a lot of arrangements, especially if you're working, to make sure that your child is adequately cared for, be it at school or whether because they come back every day. It is so hard to cater to the kids' schedule. So I find in a sense that the Swiss school system is still a little bit backwards and quite disfavorable for working parents. The next culture shock, or maybe just a more prominent observation, is realizing that the Swiss really do drink a lot. So the legal age for drinking in Switzerland is 16 as compared to 18 in Singapore. And I guess that is really accepted as part of socializing, you know, to be having a glass of wine or having beers, or especially during the summer season. And it's also allowed to be drinking openly on the streets. It's not like in Singapore where, you know, there are certain places in public that you're not allowed to drink after a certain time, but things are very much relaxed here, and it's very normal to see teenagers or young adults, you know, just hanging out along the lake and having a drink. But that of course doesn't mean that people get drunk all the time or they create havoc. I think people in general in Switzerland are still quite controlled when it comes to public drinking. It just means that it's not something that is necessarily frowned upon, but just accepted as a daily social activity. Next culture shock is related to the supermarkets. I don't know why I keep talking about supermarkets, but I'm just so fascinated by how much different it is from the ones that we have in Singapore. So, you know, like when you're at FairPrice, you're so used to the cashiers scanning the items for you and then packing it into plastic bags for you, right? So when I first arrived in Switzerland, I was just doing some grocery shopping. I was shocked because the cashier will be scanning your items, but you should be at the end waiting for the items, and you have to pack your own items. And the thing is, they really scan super fast, like and you really have to be like catching all the items and making sure that, you know, it's all packed, and then you have to scan. If you don't pack fast enough, there are people waiting at the other side of the line, and then you'll be like, why is this person so slow? So grocery shopping in Switzerland can be pretty stressful. So, but the trick is, get the fruits at the last, because those needs time for the cashier to scan the fruits and stuff, so that will buy you some time, so you have enough time to be doing all the crazy packing at the end of the counter. The final culture shock is realizing that Switzerland remains very much a cash-based society. If you're very used to all the cashless options like WePay, Alipay, I don't know, Apple Pay, all sorts of different payment functions that we have in Singapore, they're still not very much prevalent here in Switzerland. I think you will still kind of have like the Twin app, which is kind of like one of the bank apps that offers cashless functions in Switzerland, but still a lot of people just pay by cash, and especially amongst the older generations, they will go everywhere with cash and they only pay by cash. And there you have it, my top 10 Swiss culture shocks. Let me know down in the comments which was your biggest culture shocks, and also let me know if you have found any other observations that were not mentioned in this video. And also I'll keep a link up there on my first part of this video series, so you can check it out. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!